right. Oh, it's quite loud. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my talk called "The Personal is Political." Thanks so much for coming. And before I get started with my talk, I wanted to say a quick thank you to Goethe-Institut Bucharest, who has invited me to come to Dev.Play and Bucharest today. And I will be actually giving a longer version of this talk at an exhibition opening at the Goethe-Institut tomorrow. And the exhibition is called Games and Politics. So if you're from Bucharest or if you're around for a little longer, the exhibition is open until October 21st, I believe. And it's been curated by ZKM Karlsruhe. And I personally actually think it's an excellent selection of independent games. So I welcome you all to check it out. So my name is Franziska, and I'm a game designer based in Berlin. And what I would like to talk about you today in this very intimate round are the political dimensions of personal games. And I will get back to that in a couple of minutes. But first, I would like to talk a little bit about who I am and what I do as a game designer. So I've been working 9-to-5 jobs as a game designer for the past 5 years. And my focus as a game designer is actually casual and hyper-casual games. So if you're missing out on the hyper-casual talk right now, you're not actually missing out, because I'm also part of that branch of the industry. So the games that I work on, they are played in very short sessions, and they're made for quite a big audience, quite diverse audience actually. Most of those games, actually all of them, are free to play, and they monetize through in-app purchases or advertising, as you probably all know. But before I started working as a game designer, I got my master's degree in game design from New York University. And in many ways, the culture at NYU has shaped me as a designer and who I am today. There are many famous independent game designers that teach us NYU, such as Frank Lantz, who's the head of the program there, or Eric Zimmerman, or Bennett Fadi. Maybe some of those names sound familiar to you. And even though I decided against going independent and wanted to work on more commercial games, that part of the industry has always played or has been very close to my heart. And at work, I have somewhat specialized in match 3 games. There are 2 screens or 2 images of games that I've worked on. Both of them unfortunately got canceled, as is very common in that part of the industry. And that part of the industry where I work for, it often considers games as a service to players. And I will get back to that in a little second. But living in Berlin has also given me the opportunity to work very closely with Amaze. Some of you know Amaze maybe through the festival in Berlin and Johannesburg. And together with Thorsten Wiedemann, who's the director of Amaze, and Crystal Wong, I've been working for many years publishing Amaze magazine, which is a magazine about independent games culture. And I've also been involved with the festival, the Amaze Festival in Berlin. So both my work at Amaze and my education, I think they've always kept me very close to the independent game scene. And as I said earlier, the part of the industry I work at, the casual and hyper-casual industry, they consider games as a service to players. And if you look at mainstream media, games are usually described as a form of entertainment. And all of that is obviously true. It is a service to players, or games can be a service to player, and they're also entertainment. But the reason why I want to be part of this industry is because I consider games as a medium. So a medium, or I use games to express myself, to voice criticism, to share my experiences, and just to capture ideas that I have. But as you can imagine, I probably don't do that with making match 3 games. There's not a lot of opinions being put into that type of games. I do that by making very small personal games, often unreleased. And personal games, which is the main topic of my talk, you could argue that's not even a proper genre yet. And so a lot of what I'm saying is based on my own personal opinion of what I think games are, but maybe even more of what I want games to be, so the potential I seek in them. And I actually definitely think it's like this type of games, it's a genre that is growing, or it's a type of games that is growing, and I hope it'll become a genre at some point. And since I wasn't able, oops, okay, since I wasn't able to find any proper definition of personal games, I just came up with my own. So, to quote myself, personal games are autobiographical games in which the developer reflects on their thoughts and experiences. So, personal games are inherently subjective. They are about the personal experiences of the game developer. And they can cover a wide variety of topics, from love or pain and just any experience or opinion. And you could even say that for every opinion or every experience that exists, there could be a personal game. We just have to make them. And many games, many personal games are non-commercial, and that's obviously not surprising because bigger companies are profit-driven, and often. But I guess sometimes personal games, they can become commercial, but often it is the personal experience or that personal motivation that sparks something bigger. So I'm gonna go back. So here are a couple of personal games that I've worked on in the last couple of years, either by myself or in collaboration with other people. And all of them are personal in their own way, and I would like to talk about two of them in particular. So this should start playing. Do I have to press anything? So let's start with the first game. This game is called Social Me, and it's an experimental adventure game about social media as a medium of self-protection. And players can chat with their friends, they can chat with strangers, they can listen to music, they can watch porn. And basically what you do as a player, you do all of that at the same time, and you're trying to make sense of this environment that you're being presented. Sorry. Can we start it again and move a little forward in the video? So in a development statement I wrote about this game, I wrote that, quote, "This game aims to highlight the relationship between our right to privacy and our loose online habits that are often contradictory to the idea of privacy." So what I wanted to do with this game was to make a statement about our role in the discussion of public surveillance. On a side note, while working on this game, I discovered something, basically my biggest enemy, which is content, and more specifically written content. So I really like to make text-based games, but I struggle writing coherent and naturally sounding conversations and stories. Or at least I think I do. So what I did is I actually decided to outsource that part of the game to, well, actually back myself. So I started to scrape chat logs that I had with friends, and I spent hours on chat roulette and other chat sites. And I started to copy paste hundreds of pages of chat conversations, and I moved them back into the game. Obviously, most of them are taken out of context, the names are removed, and it's all anonymized. However, some secret crush might still find themselves in my chats. So what I noticed by doing that is that using natural language combined with a very familiar interface that you can see, it triggers emotions in players. And as a game designer, this allows me to use common references and associations to create a world that a lot of players can relate to. And this got me excited because emotions are very powerful. And reaching players on an emotional level, for me as a designer, that's my ultimate goal. So unlike other personal games, I wasn't trying to process something that has happened to me personally. When I worked on the game, it was around the time when Edward Snowden became a public figure. And I was very angry at the fact that governments seem to not respect our right to privacy. And but at the same time, I also started reflecting on my own social media habits and how they might feed into what governments are doing to us. But you might ask, why does this matter? The title of my talk is "The Personal is Political." Why does my feeling of anger and helplessness towards government, why does it matter? Because after all, I'm just one person. So John Donne, he once wrote a quite beautiful poem called "No Man is an Island." Quote, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if its promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends, or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." So I don't understand all the words he uses. I'm not a native speaker. And I especially don't quite get the usage of the word continent in Europe. But if you look at the German translation and you speak German, the translation uses different words that don't have like another association to it. And I would like to point out two specific passages in this poem. Quote, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." And he goes on saying, "Any man's death diminishes me, because I'm involved in mankind." And to put it in plain words, every one of you matters because you're part of something bigger. And in each one of your experiences, they matter to my experience. They help shape my experiences. And the loss of any single one of you would actually impact me. So to go back to my earlier question, yes, my feelings of anger and helplessness towards government matters, and it should matter to you. So does your feelings matter to me? So here's another game I worked on together with a couple of classmates at NYU, and this game is called Spies and Speedos. And Spies and Speedos is a first-person shooter set on a resort island for buff men, for very strong men. So this game was quite simply meant to be a parody of the way women are represented in video games. And it's something that I struggle with up to this day, and I don't want to accept that silently, basically. Again, it's a personal game because it's based on my personal frustration as a designer and a consumer of games. And maybe even in today's world, it's become more political than its intent because it came out of a joke between classmates. Now, to some of you, the title of my talk may sound familiar. "The Personal is Political" is the title that was given to an essay written by Carol Hanisch in 1969. And Carol Hanisch was part of the second wave feminism that was fighting for awareness and rights of women. Basically, the first wave feminism, what happened there was women gained the right to vote, which is great, but that was obviously not enough. And the second wave feminism was about giving women or giving equality to women in the household, especially, but also in the workplace. So in the following, I would like to go through a couple of passages from that essay. Don't worry, it's not going to get too academic. And those passages, I find them quite relevant, and I hope they help my point that I'm trying to make. So quote, "For this paper, I want to stick pretty close to an aspect of the left debate, namely therapy versus therapy and politics. And another name for it is personal versus political. The word therapy is obviously a misnomer if carried to its logical conclusion. Therapy assumes that someone is sick, that there is a cure, a personal solution. Women are messed over, not messed up." And it's particularly her last sentence that is so right for many marginalized groups and people in general. This is definitely not a talk about feminism, but I think it's just true for every one of us, regardless of our gender or our background. We live in a society, and at no point I believe we will have full control over our lives because there are a lot of influences that we have no control over. People get messed over for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but that does not mean that they are messed up. And as I said, Carol Hanisch was part of the second wave feminism. And a strong focus at that time was to create consciousness among women about their situation. And these groups, they would often meet in so-called women liberation groups. And Carol Hanisch goes on and describes the setup of those meetings. We have not done much trying to solve immediate personal problems of women in the group. We go around the room answering questions from our personal experiences. At the end of the meeting, we try to sum up and generalize from what's been said and make connections. I believe at this point that these analytical sessions are a form of political actions. I do not go to these meetings, or these sessions, sorry, because I need or want to talk about my personal problems. So at the time, and I think it's even still relevant today, there was a stigma around those meetings. And many people assumed that those women, they would just meet and whine about their problems, how horrible their life is and how unfair it is. But what I find interesting is that, yes, they may have done that, but they go beyond that. They go one step further. And they would try and connect each individual's problem and look at the larger picture. And I think this is very important when we look at personal games. Often I've noticed that there's quite a bit of backlash on personal games. And there are about the personal experience of one developer, they're subjective. But I think we need to place personal games into the bigger picture. And instead of brushing off someone's personal game as therapy of their own problems, we should look further and try and understand the context in which that game has been created and what caused the experience of the developer. And Carol Hanisch confirms it in her next passage. Quote, "So the reason I participate in these meetings is not to solve any personal problems. One of the first things we discover in these groups is that personal problems are political problems. This is not to deny that these sessions have at least two aspects that are therapeutic. I prefer to even call this aspect political therapy as opposed to personal therapy. The most important is getting rid of self-blame." And Carol Hanisch actually goes on in this essay and she talks about how powerful it would be if we would all just stop blaming ourselves. And I'd like to add that obviously self-reflection is important, but there's a limit to it. And we cannot be responsible for everything that happens to us in our lives. So how does this relate back to personal games? Why should I make, or why should you make personal games? I think a problem, or a common problem in today's society, is that there's a lack of empathy towards others. We claim to not be an island when there's something for us to gain. However, we often refuse to understand people with other points of different points of opinion or different viewpoints. And I think this is especially relevant or especially obvious in today's politics. If you just open the news, there is a refusal of both sides to listen and to understand each other. That said, I think if we want to move forward, we need to really share our experiences and we must listen to each other. And we need to connect them to understand where they actually fit together, where we may have a common ground. Because I think if we work together, we're much stronger. And games are exceptionally well at allowing players to develop empathy for topics that we may have never experienced or we know nothing about. Now, I think there are personal games that that do not aim to be political, but I would say that any personal game that gets released, through its release, it actually becomes political. And I would like to show you a couple of more games that each in their own way is personal and political at the same time. And some of these games you can play at the exhibition at Goethe Institute in Bucharest. So. Oh, actually, sorry, I'm going to go back real quick. So the first I would like to give you a trigger warning. So the first game is called After Hours, and it's developed by Bahia Khan. And Bahia is a young Muslim game developer from Johannesburg in South Africa. And she's a very deep and quite hilarious person if you get to meet her. And I would definitely recommend keeping her on your game design radar because I think there's something to come from her. And her game After Hours is yet to be released. And before I play the trailer, I would like to give you a trigger warning. The game deals with violence and the emotional consequences of that. So close your ears and eyes for 2 minutes if that is something that you feel uncomfortable with. So,
A few dozen hours can affect the outcome of whole lifetimes, and that when they do, those few dozen hours, like the salvaged remains of a burned house, must be resurrected from the ruins and examined, preserved, accounted for. Little events, ordinary things, smashed and reconstituted, imbued with new meaning. Suddenly they become the bleached bones of a story.
So After Hours is a full motion video game that plays a little bit like an interactive novel on top of video sequences. And players basically choose what happens next. And the game tells the story of a young woman who was sexually abused as a child, leading to borderline personality disorder. And Bahia, she works as a tutor to underprivileged girls in her neighborhoods. And After Hours is a personal game in the sense that she wanted to share the stories of those girls that often have to deal with emotional and physical abuse. And as a player, you are invited to embody this young woman's experiences and state of minds. And there's a moment in this game when the main character is triggered by a man that has wronged her in the past. And as a player, you're given the option to either cry or scream. But actually, you don't have the option to cry. And sometimes, basically, what happens is that your mental health dictates your actions and not the other way around. And from what I've seen of the game, it does a really great job at helping players understand what it means to be in distress and not have all of options available to you. And when I asked Bahia about the motivations for making this game, she said, quote, "I made the game because I wanted to make people feel less alone. I wanted to cultivate empathy. I didn't want to watch the world burn and know that I did nothing to stop it." So the intent of that Bahia gave this game was actually both political and personal. Now, the next game I would like to talk about is called Perfect Woman by Lea Schönfelder and Peter Liu. I'm going to start with a quick trailer.
This is Mary. Mary has it all. She's pretty. She's athletic. She's got 2 happy children and a loving husband, who's also interesting. Mary has an ambitious career, but also found her inner peace. She's cultural, and she has really good friends. Mary is never stressed out about anything. She's always happy. Long story short, Mary is perfect. And because we know that you want to be perfect too, let us present to you the Perfect Woman Life Simulator. Given your physical condition is excellent and you have supreme coordination abilities, you too can be the perfect woman.
So the main mechanic in Perfect Woman is basically body bending. And you're standing in front of a Kinect and you use your arms and legs to match poses that are on a screen. And basically the life choices you as a player make, they impact the difficulty of the poses. And then your ability to match those poses impacts the options that you have available in later life. And the intent of Perfect Woman is less personal, but definitely more political. Perfect Woman wants to encourage players to not always seek perfectionism. And in today's world, I think most of us, we often feel or we experience this pressure that we're supposed to be excellent at our jobs, we are supposed to be passionate about our hobbies, we must find a loving partner and start a family, and we must cultivate our friendships. And obviously, this can be really frustrating. And I think if you fail at one of those things, you might feel like a failure. And pressure to perform, that was definitely part of or a motivation when Leah and Peter started developing these games. But what the actual purpose of this game was, it was to make a statement about the really unrealistic expectations society puts on us. And to put it in Carol Hanish's words again, we're messed over, not best up. Now, the last game I would like to talk about. Nope, this one. This game is called Dysphoria by Anna Anthropy. And to me, Anna Anthropy is actually one of the shaping figures in personal games. And Dysphoria is an autobiographical game that deals with her experience with hormone replacement therapy. And was first released in 2012. So it's quite an old game. It's just to show that these type of games have been around for quite a while. And it's a vignette game that Anna describes, quote, almost as a diary of my own experiences. And players are asked to replay situations that Anna experienced while going through hormone replacement therapy, like trying to, for example, go to a gendered bathroom without being noticed, or just fitting in, or to put on women's clothing while your body is still in transformation. And most of those mini games are actually unwinnable, and that's on purpose. Because basically Anna wanted players to feel empathy, forcing them to go through the frustrations that she had while she was going through treatment. And this topic is, I would call it quite niche. Hormone replacement therapy is something that most of us have probably never experienced and might never experience. And it might be so distant to our own personal experience that it's quite hard to develop empathy towards people that go through this treatment. And I think that's what makes this game so important. So according to Anna, quote, players learn that a lot of the frustrations trans people face are institutionalized. These frustrations aren't isolated encounters, but fit into systems of oppression that trans people struggle with every day. And I think especially that mini game where a player has to go to a gendered bathroom and doesn't want to be seen describes that very well. But at the same time, I think dysphoria also speaks to people that are actually going through this type of a situation at the moment. And it's telling them that they're not alone and it's okay. Whatever they're feeling, they're allowed to feel that way. And Anna once said in an interview when asked about what makes games worthwhile, quote, to help us understand each other a little better instead of pushing us apart. So thank you very much for coming to my talk today. I hope you learned something.